Hi, do you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't see you.
You don't see me?
Uh,
1 second.
there we go. Something's there you go.
Hi.
Hello there, William.
Hi, Moshe. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. How old are you?
I'm 40. How old are you?
Okay, I'm 48. 48. Not
Okay, okay.
not so far off. And you're Belgium? You're from Belgium?
I'm Belgian, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah,
And
but
how
I
long
live in Bratislava.
right, how long have you been there for?
6 years.
Uh-huh. Okay, very
My wife is Slovak.
your wife is from Bratislava.
Yeah, from Banska Bystrica, a city in Slovakia, but we live in Bratislava.
Got it. Got it. Okay. I was there once. I was actually there once.
Really?
Yeah, there was a very big Jewish community there. So
Yeah, that's
there's
true.
some cemeteries and some, very
Yeah,
Jewish people there. So I was
yeah,
there twice actually. I was there two
yeah.
times. I was there. It used to be
Probably Sofer.
Pressburg. Right, right.
But
So
there's this tram station Khatam Sofer. Does that ring a bell?
exactly, that's exactly the Khatam Sofer is that's where we went to go. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, very, very good.
yeah,
It's like underground. He had like where the cemetery used to be.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
I had a very long actual. I used to live in Chicago before I lived here in Israel. I've been here about 20 years. I used to live in Chicago, and the man is not alive anymore. But he was a person from there, from Pressburg. He lived two streets away from where that station is, and he was in the Holocaust and in Auschwitz and everything. And
Oh, okay.
but that was was an old friend of mine from many
Mhm.
years ago.
And you
Uh,
were born in the US?
I was born in America, yeah, New Jersey in America, and
Yeah. Okay, East Coast.
exactly. I
Mm.
moved here about 20 years ago. Um, so I'll tell you what I'd like to try to do with you, and you'll tell me if this makes sense. But I think let's try to go through the history together, like what I mean, like step by step, and then you'll tell me
Okay,
you'll tell me where you think something is different or wrong or a mistake or something like that, and then let's see how far we get in
okay.
does that make sense?
Makes sense, Bill?
Okay, so I guess ancient history we'll just talk for a minute or two, but like the
Hmm.
Second Temple, right? The Jewish people were here in Israel at
Hmm.
the time of the Second Temple, and it was destroyed by Rome in about
Hmm.
70 of the Common Era, right? Jesus
Hmm.
was Jewish, right? And
Yeah, zealots.
yes, exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And the Jewish people had been here as the Jewish kingdom from that time period, which is something that they deny, right? You're aware of that, right? That the Palestinians deny that we were ever here to begin with. They deny that the history is ours.
That's not my impression that they deny this. Like I've met many
Absolutely.
Palestinians and they agree that thousands of years ago you were there. Yeah.
Okay, so this is good because I'm gonna send you links about these types of things where they don't they
Okay.
don't. Yeah, I'll,
That
I'll
that
send
that
that to you.
I don't know those Palestinians. I've never met anybody who denies this ever.
Okay, I'll definitely send that to you. But they
Yeah.
claim that we're making up our history over here because we're trying to
Well, that's
justify.
absurd. That's absurd, and
It is
that's
absurd.
absurd.
Yes, it is. But I'll
Well
show you.
documented.
I'll show you where they say that. I'll send
Okay.
that to you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so and throughout all of history, I'm saying until the 1800s, throughout all of history, Jewish people have always tried to come back over to here, not in a mass movement, not as a political movement, and not as a not to create a nation or a state here, but throughout
Mhm.
the 2,000 years of the exile, the Jews have constantly tried to come back here. Many great Jews. The
Mhm.
rabbis are buried in Israel, people who came back from Europe and came back from Spain and came back from Africa. Um,
Mhm.
there was never a time, there was never a time in history that Jewish
Mhm.
people were not trying to come back
Mhm.
here. And there were Jews that were living here throughout history as well. Not
Yeah.
huge numbers, but there were Jews here.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So far, so good. Yeah, we're
Yeah. I think the ones from Spain are Sephardic Jews or something.
exactly, very good.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The Sephardic Jews,
Mhm.
some of the greatest rabbis throughout the 13th century and 14th
Mhm.
century moved here to
Mhm.
Israel,
Mhm.
15th and 16th as well.
Mhm.
And it was it's in our prayers, still till today. Every one of our prayers, every day we talk about wanting to return here to Zion, and wanting to live here. And it's a place that we have never lost our connection to, right? It's a place. It's not that we're so that's already, that idea that we're colonizers, that we came here to colonize. I take issue with that, because a colonizer is a person who's going to somebody else's land, and this is a land that we've been connected to forever. So that's just one important point, I think, just in terms of the history. Now,
but I think in terms of colonizing, I think people are talking about what's happening today in the West Bank, for example.
Well,
like this systematic
so let's
taking of land step by step. But I'm interrupting you. Like, we can go through the whole
we'll get to that.
Well,
yes and no. In other words, the West Bank, that's not what they mean. They're not only talking about the West Bank. When they say from the river to the sea, that's the whole country. They call Israel white European colonizers, which I understand. My family was in Poland for 800 years. I'm very connected to my Polish roots. I've been to Poland 20 times or so, 18 times. But the people that are against Israel's existence, not just the West Bank and not just Gaza, right? That you were aware of, right? That most Palestinians, most of them, are not just against the occupation, which we'll get to, and they're not against, they're against Israel existing as a state, right? They're against the Jews living in Israel.
I must have met really strange Palestinians when I was there, because I talked to many Palestinians when I was there. Really, I was there for a month, and I had nothing else to do than to talk to Palestinians. That was kind of my job. Like, an NGO from Belgium sent me there, and that my mission, if you can call it that, was like, talk to as many people as you can, and we will pay you.
Great.
Like not the flight tickets, but my stay there. And I talked to, without exaggeration, maybe 100 Palestinians. I wrote some interviews with them, and I only met one woman, and she said, kill them all. But all the others were quite positive, like very respectful. I stayed with a host family, and the father's brother was killed by Israeli soldiers, apparently just like that. And I asked him, don't you want to, if it were me, I would want revenge. And he said, no, I don't want revenge, because then this cycle of killing never stops, and I just want peace, and all the killing should stop. So I thought that was really nice. And those were Christians. Those were not even Muslims. Because in the West, not many people are aware that many Palestinians are actually Christian.
Yeah, I for sure, I know that. I know that for sure. But so okay, so let's keep going with the history. We'll get to this point, because okay, so then Zionism, and this is also, I think, is just important to clarify, and maybe you know this already, maybe you don't. I'm saying you're obviously very knowledgeable, but Zionism began as a movement in the 1800s, right? The late 1800s, as a political movement. Now, it was most Jewish people at the time were against Zionism. Certainly the religious people, right?
Zionism. There are still rabbis who burn Israeli flags, I see.
Oh, so so this I want to clarify for you, because that is a very, very small fringe. That's a very small fringe in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Okay, yeah, that's a very small fringe. That's barely anybody. Many religious people like me. I'm a very ultra orthodox, what you would call. I have the law over here, and I'm a teacher. Like you also, I have a school of 120 girls, and I teach. Most religious people like me, what we're called ultra orthodox, or whatever you call us, Haredi here in Israel. So we do not believe in Zionism as a political movement. Right, we believe in wanting to be here and wanting to live here, just like we've been trying to do for hundreds of years, but not as a political movement. The Zionist political movement was anti-religious. They believed, Theodor Herzl was the first person.
I know the name.
Yeah, so he believed that the reason for anti-Semitism was because we kept the Torah, because we kept the law, because we studied,
Mm-hmm.
we look different with our beards and our side locks, and we don't dress the same as the non-Jews, and
Mm-hmm.
believed that that we should be dropping the religious way of being. And he
Mm-hmm.
believed that Israel that he wanted to create would be like a secular European modern secular state. So that was a huge controversy within the Jews. Many, many, many Jews, the religious ones especially, did not,
Mm-hmm.
and still till today, we do not look at Herzl as a hero at all. We do not look up to his philosophy as the right one. Jabotinsky, Herzl, Ben Gurion, all of those people are
Mm-hmm.
not people that we look up to. And there's no picture of Herzl in my house on the wall. There's rabbis on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
What we believe is that whether the Ottomans would have been here or the British would be here, so we want to live here. This is a holy land for us. There's
Mm-hmm.
certain commandments that we can only keep when we're here in Israel, and
Mm-hmm.
and okay. However, so that's just the background. But Zionism was a political movement in order to try to end anti-Semitism. It was an attempt to have a place for the Jews to set up their own country where they could be safe. I'm sure you know about the pogroms in Russia
Yeah,
and
of course, of course,
throughout all
of
of
course.
those years, terrible, terrible suffering that people went
Mm-hmm.
through, and throughout all of Europe. And
I do have a question. Like, where do you think anti-Semitism comes from? I will quickly tell you, like, a theory I heard. Like, Europeans pushed the Jews to become only money lenders. Like, many professions were outlawed, and
for
then of
sure,
course people accumulated debts, and they started to see the money lenders, the Jews, as the evil, like the guys we owe money to, and let's get rid of them better than to repay our debts. Is
for
that
sure.
is that correct
That's for
or?
sure a part of it. I don't think that's necessarily the root of it, but that's absolutely a big contributing factor. There's a book here that 1 second. There's a fascinating book. It's called The Devil and the Jew. 1 second. Let me turn off the blur on the background. 1 second. It's called The Devil and the Jews.
Okay, I don't know it.
And this is about like how
Joshua Trachtenberg.
the
Okay.
medieval conception of the Jew
Mm-hmm.
in relation to modern anti-Semitism. And
Okay.
so I think it started as a religious persecution because we didn't accept Jesus, right? So the original persecution from the Romans, which turned into the first Christian
Yeah.
empire. So it started as a religious persecution because we didn't keep
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, we didn't accept Jesus. I
Yeah.
think Jews
You
have,
killed him. You killed him. Let's say. Yeah.
and also that we killed him, right? That was
Yeah.
also a part of it, for sure. That the Jewish people in general, we lived separately. We would
Mm-hmm.
live in our ghettos, we would live separately, and we had our own customs and our own ways of being.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and then for sure, like what you said, that they weren't allowed to own land, they weren't allowed to have many of the guilds, many of the professions, so they had to get into money lending, and this added to it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But anti-Semitism is, it's the oldest hatred in the world. They say it's the one constant in every generation and in every way. I don't know, spiritually speaking, where it comes from, why it's so prevalent, and there's something to it. People say, well, like, obviously we've got to be that bad if every nation hates us through all history, so then we probably deserve it. I don't think that's the answer, but I don't know. That's a very big separate question where it comes from.
Another theory I heard was that you have Christians, you have Arabs, Muslims, and everything, but Jews seem to stick together and help each other out more than other religions. Like Protestants are not going to help some other Protestant. Jews will help each other, and it helps them to be economically successful. And then people get envious, and many are educated, get into higher positions, have political clout, and people just get envious.
That's I think that's for sure a piece of it, that there's envy at the success in business and very many ways. Like you said, this is for sure a historical fact that Jewish people feel a very strong connection, like you said, to each other, and trust.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain bond, so they in business they would be able to borrow money or count on goods
Mm-hmm.
coming from other places that made it
Mm-hmm.
easier in terms of certain ways. Yeah, there's hundreds of books that are written about this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the one answer is, or if there even
Mm-hmm.
is one answer.
Mm-hmm.
but there's no question that historically it's been true. It's been true in going back to the Spanish Inquisition in the 1490s and the Crusades even before that, and it's just always been. And one of the biggest problems that the Jewish nation had throughout all of those generations was that there was nowhere to go to save them. There was nowhere to turn to. There was no one that they could count on. And that idea, that was one of the core beliefs of Zionism, aside from its anti-religious, and political aspect. The belief was that we need a place on the planet that we can go to, that a place that will take us, and a place that will protect us, and that will be accepted there. So in the late 1800s, so this is like what I told you. I listened to that recording that Max Vindman,
Samuel.
Yeah, but that what you had on the website.
Yeah,
so
Samuel.
I didn't like what he said right at the beginning. Like you saw the comment, and you commented to me in 1882. Right, he said they came and they started to occupy the lands, but they didn't occupy anything. They came and they purchased homes and they bought it from the Ottomans.
Maybe that's what he meant. I mean, occupy can be more
but
neutral.
I'm saying all of these things make it
doesn't have to be.
I'm telling you again. I don't know about the Palestinians that you spoke to. I know a lot of them also. I know many Arabs over here. There's many Arabs who live in Israel who are
20%
and vote and have the same rights as you and me over here. But the Palestinian cause, let's say, right? The Palestinian cause, going back to the very, very beginning, they did not want Jews here at all. It's that thing that people say that they welcomed us during the Holocaust. That's
what I often see online. Like they were welcomed.
No, that's absolutely not true. That is absolutely not true. So okay, so let's fast forward. Okay, so the late 1800s, that's when Zionism began. The early 1900s is already when the problems started to begin, right? In the World War I, right?
Okay.
First, it was under the Ottomans, right? This land was owned by the Ottomans.
And then the British.
The Jews that came here in that time period, they bought the properties, they paid money, they bought land from the Ottomans or from the Arabs that were living here, and they started to develop the lands and make communities over here. Okay, what happened during World War I was a huge root of the problem, was that at the same time that the British were trying to undermine the Ottoman Empire, right? They saw the Ottomans were, it was a huge fight with the Germans and the Ottomans. And in order to try to weaken the Ottoman Empire, so on the one hand, they encouraged Arab nationalism for the first time, right? Lawrence of Arabia, you know that one?
I know.
So they started sending British emissaries throughout Arabia, not just to Palestine, but throughout all of Arabia, sending people to encourage the Arabs to get nationalism,
to rise up.
And when we win this war, you're going to get your own land, you're going to get your own country, you're going to get your own nationhood for the first time.
Okay.
And at the exact same time, they issued the Balfour Declaration, right, in 1917, in order to try to encourage Jews to support them. So they issued the Balfour Declaration in order to encourage the Jewish people to get involved in the fight also. So right then and there's already a huge problem, because they promised the same piece of land to two different people, right? They promised the Arabs that they're going to get their state, they're going to get their land. There was no such thing as Palestinians then. There's no such thing. There were Arabs, there were, in all the different areas, there was no people that was called Palestinian. There was no such thing. There was no such thing.
So far I agree, but there are maps where you clearly see Palestine, and you see passports where there's written Palestine.
No. Okay, one second. Under the Ottomans, it was a region. There was a region called Palestine.
Well, and people were there, right? They lived there. They had their land.
Yeah, Jews and Arabs both lived there, but there was no Palestinian passport under the Ottomans. It was under the British mandate, which we'll get to in 1 second. We'll get to the British.
Well, that's what I meant. Like not under the Ottomans, but then later.
Okay, so we'll get there. We'll get there in a minute. We'll get there. So on the one hand, they promised this place to the Jewish people in the Balfour Declaration. At the same time, they promised.
And wait, question. Maybe a simple question: like, what exactly did they promise to them? Like the entirety of what's now the West Bank, Gaza, and what's Israel? That's what they promised. Like, was this area delineated somehow?
Yes, yes. So it was, yes, it was much bigger. Let me see if I can find the map and I'll share it with you. 1 second. I'm just going to look online. But the initial place that was set up for the here, 1 second. Here's a map of it. Hold on 1 second. Here. I'll try to share the screen with you. 1 second. Here, this was the initial. Can you see on the screen here?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
this
parts of
was the
Syria,
original
Jordan.
thing. This entire area, all the way. This is called Transjordan. This whole section, which ended up becoming Jordan and Saudi Arabia, right? And parts of that. But this entire thing, this is what they told the Jewish people that they're going to get as part of their state. This is what was told to them, which is even larger than biblical Israel.
Yeah.
Right? Biblical Israel does not include this whole area over here, area down here. But this is the area. This is, you can look this up. There's many maps that show this. That this was the original area that was supposed to have been part of the Jewish state. Okay, but meanwhile,
but I do have a question. Like, what was the idea there? They must have known that people already lived there. So what was the plan?
So that it says that in the Balfour Declaration. I'll here now. Let's see. Maybe they have the text of it here. I'm sure also in the declaration itself. It says, right here. Let's read it together. Okay, he says, "I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet." And this is the quotation. His Majesty's government, His Majesty's government view in favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. And this next line, the Jews agreed to, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Right? And so we knew from the beginning it was going to be a mixed country.
And
right?
here they do use the word Palestine.
Well, they say of the Jewish non-Jewish communities in Palestine, right?
So in 1917, this region is referred to as Palestine.
Yes, for sure. It was referred to as Palestine since the Romans. I'm saying the Roman. It used to. Let's go back. It used to be Judea, right? Under Roman writings, it was referred to as Judea, right? Judea.
Okay.
But the Romans kicked out the Jews, right? About the year 250 or so was the last revolt that they squashed. So as an insult to the Jews, they named it Syria Palestina. As an insult, they went back to the Philistine name of the land, which was, before the Jewish kingdom began here, going back to biblical times. So the Romans were the ones who named this area Palestine. So yes, this region was called Palestine. There's no doubt about it. No one denies that. What we deny is that there was never a Palestinian state or country or peoplehood. There was never a peoplehood of Palestine. There was a region where people lived that they were not called Palestinian. That was never what they were called. In fact, you'll see in a minute, the Palestinians were the Jews that lived there were called the Palestinians. That's the people who are really called the Palestinians. So, but again, I want to just make this clear that what the Zionists received and accepted was that they were not planning on kicking anybody out. It was
where did things go wrong then?
Because let's get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. Absolutely, we'll get there. Let's go piece by piece through this. We'll get there. Okay. So meanwhile, at the exact same time that they promised this to the Jews and that they promised the same thing to the Arabs, there was a secret deal between Sykes and Picot. You know about this aspect of it? The Sykes-Picot agreement. So Sykes was the British foreign minister, and Picot was the, 1 second, I'm going to find the map for this also for you.
Sounds French.
Exactly. He was the French foreign minister, and they made up their own map, which was, totally counter to both what they told the Here, let's look at this. Counter to what they told both the Zionists and the Arabs. Here, I'm going to share this with you 1 second. Right, and they made their own map of the entire area, right? As you can see, who's going to get British rule, who's going to get French rule, which is going to be under French protection, which is going to be under British protection. And, you know what I mean? They literally made up their own map, completely ignoring what they had promised, both to the Jews and to the Arabs, right? Meaning the British were literally double dealing the entire time. They were, you know, and this is one of the things that happened when in the Russian Revolution, when the Bolsheviks took over. So they exposed this, right? They exposed that they were the whole time part of this, that the previous Russian, the Tsar, was part of this deal also. And they exposed that this was, you know, that they were, and that caused a lot of anger among the Jews and the Arabs because they were being lied to. Okay. Now back to what happened. So after the war was over, right? World War I ends, and the Ottoman Empire is now gone. Okay, so let's talk again. There's this region called Palestine, that area that's there, and it used to be under Ottoman rule, right? And that's also, I just want to make this point clear also, because a lot of times even Kim Iverson, I see she makes this point a lot, and it's totally wrong. You know, she said it's just like what the Americans did to the Indians, the American Indians. You know, they came in and took their land, and that's what the Israelis did to the Arabs. And it's just not true. This was a land that had a government, and it had a country, and there were laws here, and there were, you know what I mean, everything had been set up. You had to own land only with the permission of the government. America, before the Europeans arrived, it was not like that. There was no government there. There was no land there. Again, it's not good what they did to the Indians at all. It's awful. But that's not a similar situation whatsoever. This was a land that was ruled. It was owned by the Ottomans. If they wanted to kick anybody out, they would just kick anybody out who they wanted and expel them from their lands. And like we said, the first Jews that moved here, they bought their properties. They didn't come in and defeat the Arabs who were there and take over their properties. They would have been killed by the Ottomans. They would have been slaughtered. They bought land, they bought farms, they bought property, they bought tracts, and they built it up into, you know, their communities. Okay. So now World War I.
Question. So the Ottoman Empire collapses. Who's in charge in Palestine then?
Like, so the British. The British. So for 2 years, they followed the Sykes-Picot map, like we saw. But then already by 1919 or 1920, it was British. It was only under British control. The entire Palestine was now a colony. Right now, for the first time, it was colonized officially. The entire land, right, was under British protection and British rule. There were British policemen here. There were British army here. The British flag flew over all the major buildings. This was absolutely a British colony starting from 1919. Okay. Now, during this time period, now, between the two wars, this is when there were huge amounts of pogroms now in Russia and Ukraine. Much of Eastern Europe was very, very anti-Semitic at this time. And then a few years later, in 1931, Hitler comes to power in Germany. So throughout that time period, starting from 1920 until 1940, right, for those 20 years, this is when huge numbers of Jews and Arabs started moving here. And this is also a very important point. I'll show you right now, what's it called again? A chart of immigration into the area. It was not just that Jews started moving at that time. Tens of thousands, maybe even over 100,000 Arabs at this time also started moving into the same area, meaning the Palestinians, again, the people who claim that they're Palestinians, that they've been here for generations and all of that, that's also just not true. It's just
now it's starting to sound to me like this area was almost empty and people start moving in. Like,
that's correct. It was very, very sparsely, very, there was nothing here. It was all swamp and desert and backwater. It was never developed. There was nothing except for like the port of Haifa. There were like a few ports that had been built up, but the vast majority of this place was a total wasteland. There was nobody living here. Jerusalem was Jerusalem was always majority Jewish. It's been majority Jewish for 1,000 years. but it was a wasteland. There was nothing there. There was no agriculture until the Zionists started coming here in the early 1900s, and they started building things up and building orchards. So then also hundreds of thousands of Arabs came here from all over the Arab lands, because now there was work, there was what to do here, there was earning money here. One second, I wanted to show you this chart. I'll give you a second. One second, I have to just find this here. Here, oh, here it is. You can see the immigration chart during this time period. Here, one second, I'm going to share my screen with you again. One second. Here, okay, so this map is the map that you often see, right?
Yeah, I know this
so
one very well.
I want you to understand that it's just not true. This is wrong. There was never a Palestinian land and Jewish land. It was the Ottomans. This entire area this was the Ottomans, and you know what I mean, until okay, whatever. We'll get back to that in a second. We'll get back to that. Okay, so this is the chart I want to take a look at with you. Let me zoom in a little bit.
I see it.
Here. So if we take a look at the numbers, right? So the population over here, right, in 1860s, there was only less than 400,000 people in Palestine in total. It was a barely populated area. As time moves on, and that time was for sure more Arabs than Jews, for sure, not only Muslims, also Christians, like you said. But if you take a look starting from 1918, 1919, right, numbers go up hugely on both sides, right? In 1919, there's 500,000 Arabs. By 1922, there's already 750,000, right? 220,000 Arabs moved in to this area in those 2 years. And the numbers just keep going up. They go up and up until it gets to over 1 million. The Arab population doubled in that same 10-year period as the Jewish population doubled.
Okay.
Well, that's a very important point.
Just one question, just to be sure. Yeah. So you've told me that in Jerusalem, there was always a Jewish majority.
Pretty much, yes.
But in 1851, there were only 13,000 Jews in the whole area.
They were mostly in Jerusalem. They were mostly in Jerusalem.
But then Jerusalem was tiny.
It was tiny, yes. It was an absolutely tiny. If you look at old pictures of it, it was a tiny backwater place. It was barely anything there. It was barely anything there, and it was most of the Jews. I don't know if this number is accurate. I don't know if most of the Jews, but probably half of them lived in Jerusalem, in that area at that time. That's the holiest city for us. This is where, you know, I mean, all of our videos are about Jerusalem. So when Jews came here, that's where they gravitated towards, right? But the Jewish section of Jerusalem has been, you know, Jewish going back for thousands of years, literally. But this is a very, very important point that I think, a lot of people, Kim Iverson and people like this, they completely distort this. The Palestinians who are here today, the people who are the descendants of this 1.5 million people, huge numbers of them, more than half of them, also came here during the exact same time period.
Yeah. But this I've heard before. Like I saw an interview with Ilan Pape, which you probably know.
Yes.
And he did say, like lots of these Arabs, they also came later. They weren't there from the start.
Exactly. Well, okay, but that's
so far you're not saying anything that I take issue with.
Okay, good. Well, but then I'm telling you what you accept as true is very different from even people like I say.
I think where we start to diverge is when we talk about what's going on right now.
Okay, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. What's going on now is a product of all of this. It didn't
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm telling you that things like we're talking about now, people like Kim Iverson do not agree to. I've had contact with her. I have.
She follows you on Twitter.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, this is. The Palestinians that are here are not descendant of the Canaanites. Some of them maybe are. That's true. It's, you know, there were people that were here, but the vast majority of them are people that moved here when Israel started to become developed. Palestine started to become developed. And that happened because of the Jewish people that were here. They started to open up industry. They started to make the land be fertile. They cleared away the swamps. That's what they were doing in the early 1900s, and that's why many Arabs came. Okay, but now
wait. Another. I have many questions.
Go ahead.
So I often hear, like, if every nation in the world used Israeli logic. For example, the Romans could go to the south of England and say, "Oh, my ancestors lived here. I want to emigrate to the south of England, and it's Rome again. It's part of the Roman Empire again."
Okay, so you're going back to so there's two pieces to this. Okay, number one is, like I said before, there was never a time that there were not Jews here, meaning
Okay.
if there were communities of Romans that always were living in South England and always, declaring themselves that we're Rome and we're going to be staying here as Romans and we want to one day make this place back into Rome, then maybe I would hear that would be something that, might be significant, but that's not the case. Whereas here, there were Jewish people here always. And like I said before, even every single Jew who was not here, every single one, way before Zionism, right? This is another thing. They all believe that the Jewish idea to come back to Israel just started with Theodor Herzl in 1880. And that's just not true. That's when the political idea of Zionism began, right? But for 2,000 years, every single Jew, every single day was praying to return to Israel, to return to Jerusalem. And many, many, many of them risked their lives to try and come here and live in this land. So it's not the same argument. And every historical find that we find over here in Israel is in Hebrew. And it's all, it's our ancient history that is here. So I don't see that as a valid argument to any other place in the world. I don't think there's any other culture or nation and a land that retained that connection the way that we did. But I agree that that's not a reason that's not a reason to kick out the Arabs and to let the Jews live here. I agree. But I just want you to understand what the perspective is. You know what I mean? The perspective is that this is a piece of land. This is an area that we never were not connected to. Never. There was never a time in history that Jews, from the time of Abraham until today, that we were not focused on this piece of land. Right? And that there were Jews living here during that same time.
Okay.
Okay, so now World War I is over. It's the 1920s and the 1930s, and you see that there's huge numbers of immigrants now, Jews and Arabs, huge numbers, and this is when the problems began. This is when the problems really began.
One more question. I've read about Jews attacking the British army with terrorist attacks.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, yeah. So that's what I want to explain right now. So during this time period, during the 20s and 30s. So this is a time when the tensions really, really became huge because you had Jewish people that were promised this land, that felt that we deserved it and it was supposed to be given to us. You had Arabs who didn't want more Jews to be coming here and taking over their land. And then you had the British who were just trying to, maintain their colony over here. So this was one of the most violent time periods of this area. And yes, there are definitely many Jewish people. This was a very big, I want you to understand this also. This was not that every Jewish person who was here supported the violence and was promoting violence. It was a huge fight within the Jewish community here about how to deal with this. Many of the people that were here, did not approve of violent tactics and did not want to overthrow the British and did not want for there to be violence. But there were some that absolutely did. There's no question about it. It's called the Stern Gang and all different groups of people that, they did absolute terrorist tactics. They bombed the King David Hotel and killed over 80 British soldiers and civilians also. There were bombings of Arabs as well. And there were Arab attacks against the Jews also during this time period, exactly like what happened on October 7th, that happened during the 1920s. A very famous riot in Hebron in 1920.
I was there.
Yeah, in 1929. I'll show you this 1 second. Also, this is just to see that this is not a new phenomenon of the Arabs, and the way that they attack us and the way that they, try to get us out of here. Here, 1 second. Here, can you see my screen here? Are you able to see it or no?
I'm still seeing the graph.
Okay, so here, 1 second. So let me stop it and go again. 1 second. Here. Yeah, so this was
okay. Mhm.
I can't zoom in for some reason, but
It's fine. I see it.
yeah, in 1929 there was a huge massacre, and it was totally based on lies. It was, the Arabs made a big announcement that the Jewish people were going to be going to take over Al-Aqsa. They were going to be taking over the mosque, which was just not true. It was a total libel that they just made up in order to whip the Arabs into a frenzy.
Mhm.
And they attacked us. And at the same time, and this is also something that I think is very, very important for people to understand, the Palestinians, when Hitler came into power in 1931, so at
Mhm.
that time, the leader of the
33, 33.
I thought he was voted in 31. Okay.
But he came into power at 33.
Okay.
Mm.
So
Mm.
the leader of the Arabs at that time was a person named Hajj Amin Husseini,
Mhm.
something along those lines. Let me
Mhm.
check this with you. And he literally flew to Berlin, right,
Yeah, I
in
know. I met
the
him.
30s, and he sided with Hitler. He was one of the people that was. There's pictures of him here with
Yeah, I
Hitler,
know. Yeah,
videotapes
this I
of
know.
him visiting the concentration camps. Here's him in a concentration camp visit with a big smile on his face. He raised an SS division, the Bosnian. There was a Muslim
Yeah, I
division
know
of
this.
SS with the Quran and everything.
Yeah, I know this.
We're talking about and he was the leader of the Palestinians. He wasn't some fringe person. He was the recognized leader of the Palestinian movement. He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was the person that the British spoke to directly and dealt with directly as the representative of the Palestinians. And when he started flirting with Hitler and traveling to Germany, so then he was placed under arrest by the British, and he fled to Berlin. And he stayed
Mhm.
in Berlin until the end of the war, where Hitler protected him there. So I think that's also just something people don't realize, that they didn't welcome us with open arms. They didn't allow us to come here and seek refuge. They were trying to exterminate us with the Nazis. Literally with
Mhm.
the Nazis. This is the leader of the Palestinian people at that time, and he's shaking hands with Himmler, and he was literally trained a Nazi battalion. He got an entire Bosnian battalion of SS people to join the fight against the Jewish people. So it's a total fabrication. It's a total and complete fabrication that they were welcoming us as refugees. They were trying to kill us. They were pogroms in Israel against us. I'm
Mhm.
not saying we didn't fight back and that there weren't Jews
Mhm.
attacking Arabs. There were.
Mhm.
It's a very, very violent time period, but it was certainly not that they were welcoming us as refugees and trying to give us haven
Mhm.
over here. That's absolutely not true. They sided with the Nazis. They sided
But
with
but
the Axis
but
to the
would you
extent that, I'm sorry.
would you agree that some Palestinians welcomed them? That
Of
this wasn't.
course, no, some of
Mm.
everybody. Look, I want you to know something just about me personally. And again, I don't say that all Jewish people take the same approach that I do. I'm a very, very open, loving hearted person. I like to think the best of people. I try to. And I absolutely believe that the Palestinian people are oppressed by their leaders. I think that
Mhm.
they are brainwashed and oppressed by their leaders. And
Mhm.
even then, I know many of them, many of
Mhm.
them that are
Mhm.
very good, kind, helpful. They would, do anything for us. And even you should know, after just to be clear, even in that Hebron massacre where over 100 people were killed, and yes, beheaded, children were beheaded, and all of that, just like what happened now. But there were hundreds of Jews that were saved by their Arab neighbors. Hundreds.
Mhm.
They let them into their homes and they hid them from
Mhm.
their, from
Mhm.
the other people. That for sure happened. And of course, there are many, many Palestinians that would love to live peacefully with us and that would love to be here, but their leadership has never, ever taken that approach. Never.
Mhm.
From the very,
Mhm.
very beginning, from this guy who was friends with Hitler, he was their leadership, and they are a victim of their leadership until today.
Mhm.
Gaza is a victim of Hamas. They are a
Mhm.
victim of their leadership who refuses to do anything to help them in order for them to carry out their mission against me. And it's an awful, terrible thing. And this is what okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm saying this is my biggest criticism of Kim Iverson. I sent this, I don't know, in a post recently, but I had a whole long back and forth with her. I could show you a long back and forth over DMs over, weeks and weeks. And we were like writing back and forth every few days. And I said to her, like, my biggest problem is that all of your platform and all of your energy that you spend criticizing Israel, you should spend criticizing Hamas. That would actually do something. If the world who cared about the Palestinians would actually focus on the Palestinian leadership, and these are people who are multimillionaires, they're living in Qatar, they're living in five-star hotels as their people are dying in the streets. If you would focus on the people who are actually the ones making the decisions here, that would actually make something happen. But trying to tell Israel to make peace with people who are out to kill us, that's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Until they are able to decide that they want to live peacefully, there's no way that we're going to make peace with people who are pledging to kill us no matter what we do. So, okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves again. We're getting ahead. So this time period was an extremely, extremely tumultuous time period. There was fighting that was going on back and forth, and there were atrocities committed on both sides. There's no question about it that there were Jewish people that committed atrocities, which I'm embarrassed of and ashamed of, that I don't at all defend and say, it's good what they did. I can maybe understand it, that people who came from the pogroms in Europe and then came here and they were facing pogroms from Arabs and they said, forget it, I'm just going to kill as many as I can understand it, but I don't condone it, and I certainly don't support that in any way, shape, or form. Okay, what happened is that by the end of World War II, right, when Hitler came to power, so then obviously even more Jews tried to come to Israel. This is when the British was not letting any Jews in because of the Arabs. The British didn't want to have all of these Arab uprisings, so they were limiting the Jewish immigration. It was called the White Paper. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a famous piece. The White Paper was this a document that was signed by the British that limited Jewish immigration to Palestine at that time.
And did this terrorism have something to do with that?
Well, it was more because of the Arabs' pressure, meaning that the Arabs didn't want more Jews coming here, and the British didn't want the headache of having to deal with that, so they were limiting the immigration, right? Not because the Jews were doing the terrorism. I don't think that was the reason. I think it was more because of the pressure that they were getting from the Arabs, who didn't want more Jews, and they were also uprising. So British, look, they got themselves into this mess. I don't have so much sympathy for them. They got themselves into this, but they were in a big problem over here. I don't know if you know the relative size between.
Well, and what do you think the British should have done at that time? Like they should have kept their promise, or what exactly?
Well, I think, they first of all, they shouldn't have promised two things to two different groups and not done either one. Obviously, I think it would have been the right thing for them to establish a Jewish state, like they said they would. That I think that would have been the right thing to do when they were still here in control and could have controlled what happened afterwards. What happened though, is that in 1947, that's it. The British had had enough. They'd had enough. And two things happened at the same time. Number one is that the British said, that's it, we're leaving. We can't be here anymore. There were more British police in Israel than the entire colony of India. Right? You know how big India is relative to Israel, and there were literally more British policemen here in Israel than in the entire India. So Britain said, we've had enough. We don't want this problem anymore. At the same time, the world was for the first time now in 1946 learning about the Holocaust, right? And learning what happened to 6 million Jews, more than 6 million, right? But learn what entire Jewish communities throughout the entire Europe were just completely and totally wiped out, and people were shocked and they couldn't believe what had happened. And for a very brief time period, for a few years, it was like a very, very small amount of time that the world was very sympathetic to the Jewish people. Right? There was a very brief time period where the world felt that, okay, these people need something, they deserve something after what they've been going through. And that was what the 1947 partition vote was. So let me call this up over here so you can see this.
But by the way, there's this Slovak movie, it's quite recent, about two Jews escaping Auschwitz and writing the first report on what's happening there. And in this movie, you can see that they are not being believed, that it's too shocking to be true.
No, people didn't believe it. They literally couldn't believe what had happened until the armies, the American army, and the Russians came in and they filmed it and they took movies and pictures, and and the Nuremberg trials, when people saw what actually happened, that was when the world actually believed it. Even the Jewish people in America couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that this is actually what was happening. But this is what was planned in 1947. This is what's called the partition plan, right? This was what the United Nations had voted on. Okay, now you'll notice that it's much, much smaller than what the British had originally promised, right? The original British promise included this entire area
Yeah.
here of
Yeah.
Transjordan. Okay, so all of that was off the table at this point, but this is what the partition plan was. Everywhere that's blue was meant to be for Israel, and everywhere that was this, brownish color, this was meant to be for the Arabs. And Jerusalem was going to be international. Jerusalem was going to be under international control, and I don't know exactly what that means. They would, the holy places there would be, kept by an international force, and everybody would be allowed to go there. But this is going to be the situation. Okay. Now,
Looks messy from the start. I mean, I don't know
very messy, very, very messy.
I don't know who can believe that this is gonna work.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. And just to understand is that this entire area basically from here down to here is here we go. This entire area is a desert, right? This entire area, Beersheba, all the way. If you came to Israel, I don't know if you went to Eilat. Eilat is all the way here at the bottom, but it's like a 4-hour drive through a desert. There's nothing here. Nothing habitable. There's no, there's just nothing. It's the vast majority of the place that we were given was a desert, right? And this was how it was broken up between the Jews and the Arabs. Yes, it looks ridiculous. And the Jews accepted it, though. We accepted it, and the Jews were very excited about it, and they felt for the first time that the world is recognizing them and recognizing that we need something, and we said we'll take it. And that's also something Kim Iverson recently wrote a post about the history, and she said no, neither side was happy with the partition. It could be that the Jews weren't happy with it, but they accepted it. They absolutely did. They said yes, we'll take it. We're very happy, and we'll take it. Even though, again, most of it is desert. What the Arabs said was, this is not fair, right? We outnumber the Jews here, like we saw on that chart before. We outnumber the Jews by like 3-2 or so. How come they're getting half the land, right? That doesn't make any sense. The answer to that is two things. Number one, most of the land is desert. That's just one point. Number two is it was fully understood and fully recognized that there were 1 million refugees now throughout Europe after the Holocaust. There were 1 million Jewish people in displaced persons camps all throughout Europe, and they were going to come here. So yes, it's true that there were more Arabs actually living here at the time, but it was also true that this was set up in order for there to be a place for all the Jews that had nowhere to go. Right? My family didn't go back to Poland after the war, the ones who survived. Nobody was going to go back to their places after the war. So it was so that's just a completely false argument that they make. It's not fair. It's not a fair division. The Arabs get 50-50 when they had many more people. But the point of it was to be the place for all the Jews in the world to be able to go to, especially the 1 million Jews that were stuck with literally nowhere to go.
Okay.
So this was
and at this point, did some Palestinians lose their house?
No, nothing happened yet. Not yet. No, nobody lost any houses yet. Nobody lost any property yet. Everybody was living in houses that they had lived in and bought. And the idea is that Jews could live in the Arab areas and Arabs could live in the Jewish areas, but they would just be two different countries, right? Just like Jews can live in Poland today and Polish people could live in the United Arab Emirates, and what I mean? So that was the plan. It would be two different countries. One would be Jewish, one would be Arab, right? But of course anybody could live wherever they want and wherever they wanted to live. But this was the plan. What happened is that in 1948, in May or April, I don't remember the date. I know the Hebrew date on the Hebrew calendar. I don't remember what the English, the secular date. But the British officially decided that we are leaving. We're leaving Palestine. The UN voted to partition it and that to allow for a Jewish state. So in 1948, the British flag came down. The British troops packed onto boats and left. And the state of Israel was declared, right? And they were ready for this. The Jewish people had been preparing for this. They had a whole structure of government already set up. They had Ben Gurion selected to be the president, the prime minister. They had a whole system already in place that they were just waiting for this opportunity in order to create their nation. Okay. The Arabs did not. Okay, now this is the first fatal flaw of the Palestinian problem right now. The Arab people, but not just the ones that were living here and living in the areas that were now decided for Israel, but also Egypt, also Jordan, also Lebanon, also Syria, also Iraq, they all declared war. Right? They
This I
declared
know.
war, and not just a war. 1 second, I'll read you the quotation. I'll show you too. Here. 1 second. Here's 1 second. Let me share this with you. This just a map showing all the places that they came in from, by all the different armies, the Iraqi army, the Jordanian army, the Syrian, the Lebanese, the Egyptian. They all attacked simultaneously to this tiny group of people. Again, Holocaust survivors, people who had just survived the Holocaust, and many of them made it here. And this is what he said. This is what his name was, Azam Pasha. Okay, and this is what he said proudly. He said, right, the Secretary General of the Arab League. And he said, this war will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongol massacres and the Crusades. This is like literally what they said. There was no hiding it. This was a genocidal war. This was the Arabs saying, that's it. Enough with these Jewish bastards. Enough of this problem in our side. We're going to finish this once and for all. 7 Arab armies, the full army of those countries that had been around now for a while, they all attacked Israel simultaneously, right? To us, the Jewish people, this is one of the biggest miracles that the Jewish nation has ever witnessed, that we were able to survive. We weren't wiped out. It's a miracle how it happened, literally a miracle. These handful of a few thousand fighters, again, people who had just survived the Nazi camps, they were just liberated 3 years ago, right? Picture a person who was in Auschwitz 3 years ago, and now here he is with a rifle, right? With this army of extermination coming to him, right? In order to wipe us out. Now, what happened now is the big key to what happens today, because at this point, the Arabs announced over the radios, and this is not Hasbara, this is not propaganda, this is a factual, absolutely a factual historical, on the historical record. They said on the Arab radio, Arabs, leave your homes. Leave your homes. We're coming to wipe out the Jews. We don't want you to be in the way. We don't want you to be caught in the crossfire. Leave your homes. In a week, you're going to go back, and not only will you have your home, but you'll have your Jewish neighbor's home also. That's what happened. The Arabs announced, and this is not controversial. I'm saying, I don't know, everybody will.
No, I've heard this before.
Is a fact. This is a fact. I have a friend here who's a Palestinian, and he says his grandmother still had the key, and they locked the door with the key, but not because Israel was coming with guns. That's not true. In some places it happened. We'll get to that in a second. In some places there were people that were chased out. I'm not going to deny that, but the vast majority.
But I think there were also some massacres that Israeli soldiers.
One massacre in Deir Yassin. We'll talk about that. We'll get to it. 1 second. We'll get to it. But the majority of the Arabs who left their homes in 1948 was at the very, very beginning. It was all over the Arab press, all over the Arab radio stations. Leave your homes, and in a week, you're going to come back to get 2 homes. That was like literally what they said. There was a war of extermination to just push the Jews into the sea. That's what they said, and we're going to win. Now, okay, now at the same time, yes, it was a war. There was fighting. There were definitely atrocities that were committed by Jews. I'm not denying that, and I'm not, again, not proud of it. I'm not condoning it. I'm not happy. Can I understand it? I can understand it when there's a village of people that are giving cover and helping the exterminating army, and now they have a chance to be attacked and to fight them back. It's war. It's awful. It's terrible. I don't condone it. It doesn't make me happy. I don't revel, or like what you described, what I see when I see Gazan children. That's not at all how I feel about it. However, it happened in a war for extermination. There were times where the Jewish people did bad things to the Arab communities. A few of them. There was not large scale massacres. There was no, they couldn't afford to do large scale massacres. They were fighting against the armies. They couldn't afford to be wasting their time, clearing out friendly villages of Arabs. the villages and the places where they had offered support to the armies or offered support to snipers or offered support to the Arabs who were hiding among them. So yes, there were a few places. Deir Yassin is the most famous and infamous, I should say. And even that, there's a big question as to exactly what went on. There's different accounts, okay? But there was no question that there were atrocities, no question that there were homes and they just threw hand grenades into the homes and killed people. It definitely did happen in the context of a war, an explicit war of extermination. So again, I'm not condoning it, and I'm not it happened. It did happen, but that was a minority of the people that were chased away. I'm telling you, this is again as a fact. I don't have to. We could look up and see what the numbers were. I don't know if there are clear statistics.
In Belgium, we have this historian, Catherine Lucas is his name. He's written several books about this. I've read one of them, and when I read his book, it sounds very different. He makes it seem as if hundreds and hundreds of villages were destroyed by the Israelis.
I don't think that that's correct. I don't think that that's correct. In an effort to chase them out, in an effort to wipe out the Arabs, I don't think that. Okay, I don't know. You show me. You could show me. I'm open to reading and seeing. And
his claim is also that some massacres took place in order to scare Arabs to start leaving.
So that's what happened in that place called Deir Yassin, right? That's what they said. They wanted to try to scare the people away so that they would leave and not be there. But again, they were giving cover to invading armies, and there were militias that were hiding among these cities, among these villages, and among these cities. Well, let's hold off for a second, because let's go for it, because
that's kind of the same argument as today, that Hamas is using human shields, so we can bomb them.
Oh, okay, 1 second. Okay, so let's go piece by piece, because that wasn't in the midst of this war. What happened is that within a few days or weeks, I don't remember exactly how long it took, but the fighting stopped.
Right? Yeah, it was quick. Yeah.
The fighting stopped during this war, and that's how we got from here to here. Okay, yeah. So let's just take a look at
one more question out of curiosity. So, sure. How did they manage to fight them off when so many armies attacked them all at once?
I don't. My answer is that it's a miracle. I don't know what the military history books will say. I think part of it, they said, is that the Arabs, because there was not like a uniform solidarity among the Arabs, so they were very suspicious of each other and therefore didn't coordinate as strongly as they could have. I don't know.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, because there's no question that they were outnumbered. I don't know, 100-1 or something like that. It was a ridiculous mismatch in terms of the numbers. But so now I want to just like zoom in on this map over here, because this is again pre-1947. So again, I explained this to you, that this first map is not true. This whole area was Ottoman, the white and the green. It was all Ottoman. Anywhere that there weren't Jews, they're making that into Palestine. That's just not true. The whole area was Palestine. It was all Ottoman. There were Jews and Arabs living all over the place. The entire desert was not populated by Palestinians. That's just that's a joke. Okay, this is the UN partition plan, like we saw on the other map, right? This is the 3 sections of Arab places, and the white is the proposed Jewish state. Now, that war that they lost, right, that the Arabs lost, so these became the boundaries, right? At the end of that war, again, which miraculously somehow not only the Jewish people survived, but they survived in pushing back against the invaders, right? And that these became the boundaries, right? That they took over this whole area up here. They pushed into the West Bank, what's now called the West Bank over here. Jerusalem is smack in the middle. It was cut in half. There's East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, right? And the area that's now Gaza.
Sorry, other question.
Sure.
So they were militarily successful, but why didn't they manage to take all of Jerusalem if they were so successful? Like they were
fighting. They were fighting against the best, most fierce fighters were the Jordanians, which you could see even from the map. That most of the area that Jordan came on, the Arab League was fighting with Jordan. These were people that were hardened from World War II. They fought in World War II. They were trained fighters and militias. They were the best fighting force. So they were the ones who were most successful at holding back the Jews. That's why this area remained like this, right? But this is how the fighting stopped. So we're no longer looking at the partition plan. They rejected the partition plan, right? The Arabs rejected it. So that this is no longer worth anything, right? Now this is how the fighting ended. When the fighting ended, Jerusalem was cut in half. They pushed out the Syrians completely. They pushed back the Egyptians into the Sinai Desert, except for the area of Gaza over here. And this is how Israel was from 1947 till 1967. Okay, now, but now this is the time period, what you're talking about now, this is the time period during these 20 years where these massacres that you're talking about, or people being chased away, or things like that, was going on. There was a road, the main road from Tel Aviv, which is like here to Jerusalem, right? There were many Jews still living in West Jerusalem at the time, and the main road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which is still the highway today, the number one highway, it's called, the number one, and along that road were many Palestinian villages of people who didn't leave during the fighting, right? They stayed and they remained there, and for years there were fights that would be breaking out. They would be sniping at the cars driving along the road. They would be throwing grenades into the cars as they were driving along the road. So one of the military goals of the Jews during this time period was to provide safe travel between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And it's all hills the whole way. And still today, if you were here and you travel the highway, it's surrounded by hills all over. And every one of those Palestinian villages, not every one of them, I take that back, right? But many of them were harboring militias, harboring terrorists, harboring groups of fighters who were sabotaging the road, who were bombing cars that were driving along the road. They kept on having to create like these ad hoc armored cars that they're still along the highway. There's a memorial to the people who used to drive that road to bring supplies to Jerusalem. And there's like these bombed out cars, a whole series of them. And they're all like regular Jeeps with like pieces of metal, welded onto the sides and the top and all of this to try to protect the people, because Jerusalem had very, very little supplies. Also, I forgot one piece. I'm sorry, there's an important piece over here. One second. That for the first time now, Jerusalem was free of Jews, right? This is also, there's a famous quote over here by one of the Jordanian fighters, right? And he said, for the first time in 1,000 years, not a single Jew remains in the Jewish quarter. Not a single building remains intact, right? They blew up 58 synagogues. There are 58 ancient synagogues in Jerusalem, and every single one of them was destroyed. This makes the Jews' return here impossible. So, again, we were facing extermination. We were facing ethnic cleansing. All of these things that they accuse the Jews of doing are things that happened to the Jews during this time period. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. Right. And by his own admission that there were Jews in Jerusalem for 1,000 years before this. Right. Now is the first time in 1,000 years that there's no longer any Jews. Okay, this was the time period when there was a lot of ad hoc fighting that was going on. The war was, not raging between armies, but there were militias and fighting. The Jordanians were constantly fighting and bombarding West Jerusalem from the walls of the old city in East Jerusalem. And it was not a peaceful time for anybody during this time period. And yes, it is definitely the truth that there were Arab villages and places that had been run by the Arabs that were determined to be security, risks, etc. And they were, asked to leave, told to leave, threatened to leave, chased out. All of those different terms are probably applicable within the context of a genocidal war that is going on. But it was never the Jews' goal to get rid of all the Arabs from the place. Some people it was. There were some people, like a famous person, Meir Kahane, who was a very big extremist who became outlawed in Israel. The Israeli government outlawed him and his party. So he believed in just forcibly removing all the Arabs from Israel. He said, they're always going to be a problem. Let's just get rid of all of them forcibly. But that's not what we did and not what we would do. And until today, there's 2 million, over 2.1 million Arabs who live in Israel, who are full citizens, full rights. That my rheumatologist is a Palestinian. Arab. The person who works the pharmacy down the street from me is an Arab. That thing that they call apartheid, it's an apartheid state. That's a total lie.
But what I read is that these Arab Israelis that they are second-rate citizens.
That's
They don't have the same opportunity.
Is there racism? There's racism in every country. There's racism here against the Sephardic people also, but they are not second-rate in any legal way whatsoever. And most Israelis don't treat them any different. Most Jewish Israelis, most people have no problem with them. We have no issues. They're regular people. They live here. They're peaceful. They're helpful. They are part of our life, a part of our culture, a part of everything that goes on here. There is zero legal difference. Zero. Not a single law. Not a single law. You can't show me a single law that exists that differentiates between an Israeli and a Jewish and a non-Jewish citizen of Israel. Not a single law. You know what they point to when you say this? They say, okay, but the people that lived here before, they can't return. And me, as a Jew who lives in New York, I can go to Israel even though I have
heard this.
Okay, yes, because for the first time in history, there was a land that was created for the Jews. So that's not a law against the Arabs. That's not a law discriminating against people who are not Jewish. That's because Israel, this tiny, tiny little place, was set up for the first time in world history to be a place for the Jews. So yes, it's open to any Jew who can come here and who wants to come here. But it's not.
But you understand that for onlookers, it looks like this tiny country tries to be racially pure. And that it seems to be a very racist project.
It's not. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's absolutely not. Living here in Israel among Israeli Arabs, they have the same driver's license that I do. They have the same voting rights that I do. There's not a single legal differentiation. Are there racists? There's racists in every country, in every society, but that's not the country. That's not the tone. You speak to the people who live here, to the Arabs, Israeli Arabs who live here, among every single poll that has ever been given to them, they all say they would rather live in Israel than any other Arab country, because they're more free here than anywhere else. There's no question about it. Look that up. Look it up online. And polls of Israeli Arab citizens of Israel, time after time after time, definitely don't want to live under Hamas. They don't want to live under the PA, and they don't want to live under any other of the Muslim countries, because this is the only free democratic country.
Okay, sorry that I interrupt you.
No problem.
Do they serve in the military? How do they feel about this situation?
Yes, they serve in the military. Yes, there are Muslim Arab soldiers.
If they get the order to shoot at other Palestinians, they should.
Yes. There's a guy on Twitter. I'll send you his profile. You can follow him. He's a Muslim soldier in the Tzahal. Yes, they're not drafted. That's the difference. They're not drafted into the army. They serve only voluntarily. What? I'm sorry?
Why are they not drafted?
So I don't know what the rationale behind that is. I don't know, but that is a difference. They're not drafted into the army. They only serve voluntarily. Right? But anybody who wants to serves. Yes, there are absolutely Arab, Muslim, and Christian Arab units, and not just their own units. I'm saying they among the Jewish people, and every ambulance has 2 Israelis and 2 or 3 Arabs in every sector of life. The Arabs are 100% a part of our country. Nobody's trying. What do you say? And the Druze also, right? My wife's pointing out the Druze people. There's many Druze that live here as well, that are also Arabic, but those people are also fiercely Zionistic and supportive of the state. But that's absolutely, it's just not true. Every single place you walk around Jerusalem is Arabs all over the place, women in their hijabs, everything all over the place, just living, and nobody's throwing rocks at them, nobody's spitting at them, nobody's pushing them to the back of the line, nobody's saying, no, you don't eat in my restaurant. They're the ones serving in the restaurants. They're the ones. That's a total. If you want, I could start going forward. I could start, like, when I go out into town, just sending you pictures of just everyday life of every people around, all the people, the Muslims who are behind the desk at the DMV, at everywhere. It is there is zero apartheid law, zero apartheid, anything. Can you find racists, and can you find people that you trust them, etc.? Of course, but you'll find that in every country. You'll find that more about Jews in any other country in the world than you'll find that about Arabs here. That's just absolutely,
And,
absolutely.
and are they all bilingual? Do they speak Hebrew and Arabic, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah, they go to regular schools. They go to the regular schools with the Israeli kids. They go to regular high schools, regular colleges, regular everything. They speak Hebrew, they read Hebrew. Usually their English is better than the Israelis. Like usually the people speak better English. I just have noticed that. I don't know why that is the way, but
Yeah, that's
they're
surprising.
all 100% integrated into regular life. Their holidays are legal holidays also. They get off for Ramadan from work. They get off for, whatever the Eid, what, I don't know, Al-Fatir, whatever they get off for their holidays. They are 100% a part of life. In downtown Jerusalem, there's a court, and then there's a Jewish court, and then there's an Islamic court also, meaning for people who want to go to the Jewish court as opposed to the secular one, or people who want to adjudicate their case in front of the Islamic court. And it's a regular building, the same as the Jewish one, the same as this. It is 100% an integrated society. Absolutely. That's an absolute total lie. And again, you can speak to any person who lives here and look at pictures, see what's going on. What they do, their trick of their language is they say, well, no, but the people in the West Bank, they don't get to vote and they don't have rights and that's the apartheid, right?
Yeah, that's what I hear. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get there. So let's get there in a minute. We'll get there in 1 minute. Okay, 1 second. Sorry. Okay, so anyway, between 1947 and 1967, this is the way it was. It was a very tense time. There was constant, skirmishes and fighting going back and forth, and also at the same time, there were many, many hundreds of thousands of Arabs who became citizens and lived here the same as everybody else, not chased away, not trying to be chased away, just living their lives, driving buses, doing every manner of work. Like I said, one of my doctor, a rheumatologist that I go to is an Arab, and a pharmacist down the street is an Arab, and all in every walk of life there are Palestinians, Arabs that live, Christian or Muslim, including in the army. Yes. Okay. Then what happened was in 1967 there was another war. Okay, in 1967, this is the 6-day war, right? And this is again when it was against Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. Again, a three-pronged attack from all three sides. And again, Israel not only won the war, right, but they massively expanded their territory. For those years following the 1967 war, the entire Sinai Peninsula belonged to Israel, right? You know this. But before they made peace with Egypt, the whole Sinai Peninsula. Here, 1 second. Let me find the map of this. 1 second. Here. One second. Here, so this was after the 1967 war, right? So Israel, which had been this light blue section, right, took over all of these areas. That's when the Golan Heights came to Israel because they beat back Syria. That's when they beat back the Jordanians all the way to the Jordan River, right, and took over now what we call the West Bank. And all of this, right, the entire Sinai Desert was Israeli at that point in time. This entire map was now Israel. The whole Sinai Peninsula. My father's a physician. They grew up in South Africa. They were born in South Africa. They left because of apartheid. They hated it there and they left. They came to Israel in 1969. My father was in El Arish. He was a doctor in a hospital in El Arish in the Sinai Desert. This entire area was Israel. The Israeli army set up a defensive line here along the Suez, along this whole area. The entire Sinai Desert was Israel. But again, just like the Negev Desert, there's barely any life here. There's no cities. So, it's just a huge desert. But this was all part of Israeli land, including Gaza, including the West Bank, and including the Golan Heights, which they took from Syria. Okay. So if anything, this is when something you would call the occupation began, right? Because what happened is that Israel beat back the Jordanians to the Jordan River. And now this area was controlled by Israel for the first time. But I just want to point out to you, right, between 1948 and 1967, right, Jordan owned this land, right? It was occupied by Jordan. They didn't set up a Palestinian state. They didn't create a state for the Palestinians. They didn't do anything for them. They occupied the land the same way that Israel's quote unquote occupying it Now,
Mhm.
if they
Mhm.
wanted to have created a Palestinian state, they had 20 years that they could have done that, but they don't, because they also don't really care about Palestinians. They have their own country. The Palestinians are a good pawn to use in their, tensions with Israel, but they had this entire area to themselves. Not a single Jew lived in any of these places, right? That also realized every single Jew that was here was kicked out during that time. There
Mhm.
are Arabs in Israel. Not a single Jew lived in this entire area. All the Jews that lived here, thousands of them were kicked out, just like those Jews in Jerusalem were kicked out, right? Because the Arabs took over. So now,
Mhm.
for the first time, Israel pushed back the Jordanians. And now this land, which again, let's just review, it was Ottoman, right? It was offered to the Arabs to create a state. They turned it down. It was then occupied by Jordan and now occupied by Israel. But it was
Mhm.
never Palestinian land. It wasn't. You understand what I'm saying? It was the Ottomans, then it was the British, then it was Jordanian, and now it's
Mhm.
Israel. But it was
Mhm.
never the people who lived there's land. Never. They always had other governments over them. They had the Ottomans, then they had the British, then they had the Jordanians, and now they have Israel. And under Jordan, they also didn't have rights. They also were not accepted as Jordanian citizens. They also, right, but nobody cares about that. Nobody cares
Mhm.
about it when it wasn't the Jews who were doing it to them, right? But during those
Mhm.
20 years between 1948 and 1967, they were also completely bereft of any rights, of any, anything like that. And they were living under Jordanian rule. Okay. What
And
happened was is that Israel, in order to, yeah,
did Israel at any point offer these Palestinians in the West Bank, like, look, you can become Israeli citizens? And
well, they were offered a country twice with the Oslo Accords and the Camp David Accords. They were offered with Arafat twice to create their own country. Yes,
and what exactly did they do then?
they started the Intifada. That's how they responded, right? I'm saying, that they've been offered peace 5 times by Israel, right? They've been offered peace deals.
Well, here I hear very conflicting versions, like that they were never offered a real peace deal, that they were offered something that they couldn't possibly agree to. You
What does
know,
that mean? What does that even mean? That they couldn't?
like that the offer was just not good enough.
They were offered under the Oslo. They were offered 97% of the land with land swaps, meaning 97% of the land that they
of
had
the of the
the
of the of the West Bank then.
of the West Bank. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
97% was going to be given to them, and they had every chance of having a state. They reject time and time and time again, starting from 1947. This whole
Mhm.
thing could have just been avoided if they just said, "Okay, we'll take it," from the very, very beginning. The entire thing could have just been finished, and they would have had their own state. They would have their own way of living, and that's the same thing that happened in
But
Gaza.
but
I mean,
then but then so somebody like Kim Iverson will disagree here, I suppose. She will
well,
disagree,
I don't
right?
know what she would say. What would she
But
possibly say?
because the people I follow, they always claim that it's the other way around. That Israel was never in favor of a two-state solution. They always sabotaged that, and the
No,
Palestinians
that's
would be
only the
more than
past, that's
happy.
only for the past 10, 15 years. That's so not true. That's absolutely not true. What sabotaged it was them turning down peace and
Mhm.
starting the Intifada instead. That's what sabotaged it. But the Ehud Olmert and Rabin, they offered them peace. That was all of Gaza in 2005. Do you know what an unbelievable controversy that was over here in
I
Israel?
remember that. I followed
They
that.
literally, Jewish people were forcibly taken from their
I
homes in
remember. I
Gaza,
remember. I
removed, and
saw
said,
that
no,
on
no,
television.
no, we have to do this. We have to have a chance for peace.
Mhm.
We're never going to know if we don't try. And everyone was saying against it. They were saying, no, it's just going to become a terrorist base. It's just going to
Mhm.
become a place where they're going to breed terrorism. And look what we're dealing with until
Mhm.
today. There's
And
no reason in the world. Wait, I just want you to understand this idea,
Mhm.
William. There's no reason in the world other
Mhm.
than the Palestinian leadership being, vicious, bloodthirsty, and hateful anti-Semites. There is no reason in the world that Gaza needs to be the way it is today. No reason.
Mhm.
It did not start out with a blockade. It did not. In
Mhm.
2005, Israel left. There was no
Mhm.
blockade. People could come and go. They had an airport. Everything was set up for them. And then Hamas took over and started using
Mhm.
it as a place to launch terrorist attacks against Israel. So Israel and Egypt,
Mhm.
right?
And
Egypt
then
also set up the blockade. Why?
mhm.
Egypt's also Zionist now. Egypt blocked them off because they're also afraid of the terrorists. It is 100% on them. what happens in Gaza. We
Mhm.
did everything we could do. We literally took our people out from there. We left behind the infrastructure, right? European people paid money to leave behind greenhouses, leave behind factories, leave behind all of these things. We withdrew completely and said, okay, let's see, do it. Let's see, please make a beautiful, they have beautiful beaches. If you went and saw that hashtag that I sent you about the Gaza you don't see,
winter.
Beautiful property there, beautiful beaches. They could have made resorts. They could have made it into a tourist attraction. There's no reason in the world that that didn't happen except for their refusal to live with Israel. Their refusal to live in peace with us. That's the only reason this happened. And that's what I keep on telling Kim. Like, you're blaming us. Focus on Hamas. Focus on the people that refuse peace. What more could we do? And now you want me to do that again with the West Bank? Now you want me to leave the West Bank and leave it to them to do this again? Why in the world would I do that?
But there's this theory circulating that Israel funded Hamas initially to create some tension within the Palestinian community and
I don't know. I don't think that that's true. I think what actually happened is that Israel allowed for the funding to get to them. I don't believe that Israel funded it. I don't know. I don't know. Whatever. I don't know.
I saw some quotes by Israeli leaders that where they admit that initially we supported them so we could get rid of the others of the PLO and Fatah.
I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know.
Sorry,
I don't know what the secretly is going on behind the scenes. What I do know is that in 2005, first in 1947, then in 1982, then in 1995, then in 2005, they've had opportunities to make something of themselves. They've had opportunities to make a Palestinian state, to live with dignity, to live in freedom, to live however you want to live. But they, at their bottom line, they refuse to live with Israel. They don't accept any of this. They don't accept Tel Aviv. They don't accept Jaffa. They don't accept Haifa. They don't accept Israel. So I agree with you. I don't know that there is a solution. I think what happened over the past 20 years is that we, the Israelis, right, realized that we've just been burned time and time and time and time again, and we're sick of offering them things now. We're sick of it, and what do you want us to do? Every time we offer you something, it gets worse for us, and you make more violence and more problems for us until there is a huge change of Palestinian leadership, until there's a new generation. But they don't let it. They kill people who are against them. That's the problem, right? Anybody who speaks up and anybody who tries to stand up to Hamas or the PA, anybody who tries to do something that is more constructive, they get killed, literally. But they can't speak out. They can't speak,
but the PA seems to cooperate with Israel in many ways.
Certainly more than Hamas, but Mahmoud Abbas is always in Arabic talking incitement, always talking, Holocaust denial. He's always saying things to his people that are just like Arafat. Arafat did this for decades. Arafat in the English press, he was very, very charismatic. He was very, personable, and in the English press, he would always talk in a very, very, pragmatic, charismatic way. But then in the Arab press and then talking to his people, he would just rile them up for violence and murder, and it's literally been the way it's been since the 1920s.
I've heard the same criticism of certain Israeli leaders that when they appear on CNN, they are very affable and reasonable, but then in the Hebrew press, that they are much more aggressive and much more violent.
So you'd have to show that to me. I don't know. Show that to me. I would like to see it. But again, I'm not a big fan of Bibi. I'm not a supporter of Bibi. I'm not like a I don't. But I don't know what else we're supposed to do at this point. I don't know. These are people. I don't know if you saw it just yesterday. It's going around the video. It's going on. The same guy, that Hamas guy, the spokesman who goes on all the news shows, and he said, we're going to do this again. October 7th, October 10th, October 1,000,000th. We're going to keep on doing this every opportunity we get. That's literally what he says. So, to me, the tragedy is that all the liberal-minded people like yourself, like Kim Iverson, like Katie Halpert, like all these people that are, liberal-minded, and you really have the best interest of the Palestinian people in mind, and you really see it as a tragedy, which I do too. It's a tragedy. It's awful. It's awful. However, putting pressure on us to give up our lives is not going to work. They're not going to do it. Israel is not going to commit suicide over here. We're not going to.
But,
Right?
but that's not what we're asking. What we're
Well,
asking
yes, it
is a
is by
real
telling us telling us to make a ceasefire, telling us to leave the West Bank. Right? Right? Leaving Gaza was suicidal. It was. Right? We did something suicidal in order to try to make peace and show the world, look, we're willing to do something here. We're willing to try to do something. And of course, it was controversial. Of course, it was painful and difficult, but we did it. And look what we got in return. So, and now you're going to tell us to do that in the West Bank? You're going to tell us to do that? Why in the world would we do that? Until we would see a change amongst the Palestinians, until we would see a change amongst their leadership of people who are actually talking sensible, actually talking about peace, actually talking about living side by side and not sponsoring terrorists, not paying people for committing acts against Israel and getting shot or going to prison, and then they get a stipend for their family for the rest of their life. Not all of these things are contrary to peace. They choose violence at every turn. Every turn of a possible peace, they choose violence, starting from 1948. Literally, starting from 1948.
Can we talk a little bit about the West Bank, because I'm much more familiar with the West Bank than with Gaza. I was never in Gaza. I was
so the West Bank also until the first Intifada in 1984, 85. Right, I don't remember exactly when it started, 83, 88, maybe 87. Until the first Intifada, the West Bank, they could come and go. If they wanted to drive from Ramallah to the beach, they could go. They wanted to go to Tel Aviv, to Jaffa, they could go. What happened is they started an intifada. They started terrorizing Israel. They started blowing themselves up and blowing up buses and shootings and killings. So Israel said, I'm not going to let this go on. I'm just not going to let it happen. And they have to, yes, have checkpoints, and yes, search them, and yes. And now do they go overboard? Perhaps they do. And are there
I think they do. I really think they do. I was there. I mean,
I understand,
what I saw was
you're coming in 2009, right? You said you were there in 2009. You're coming in after decades and decades of us trying to deal with them, trying to work with them, trying to have peace deals with them, and every single time they respond with violence. In 2009, Hamas already took over the West Bank. They already purged anybody who wasn't on their team violently, right? You know this, if you know that.
This I know.
In 2007, right? So yes, by 2000, the second Intifada had already happened, and by 2000, and the wall was already being constructed. Thank God, because it protected us from suicide bombers. And yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible that the wall cuts into people's fields and it cuts through people's homes and all. It's terrible. But we're not going to just let them blow us up. We're not going to do that.
That I get. Okay, that I get. But in the West, or at least with people like me in the West, there's this perception that Israel breeds terrorism by the way they treat Palestinians.
But that's exactly what I'm trying to show you. That going back to 1929, we've been dealing with the terrorism. This is what the West doesn't understand. You're coming very late into the game. So you're looking at our response and you're saying, oh, it's so heavy-handed, it's so strong, it's so bad. They were doing this from the beginning. They were doing this from the beginning. It started with a war of extermination. It wasn't terrorists, it was armies. These people's grandparents were part of the armies that tried to destroy us. And that's it. That's their only way of being since then. If there would be people that would be actually looking for peace, if there would be, and they did it with Arafat. They tried to make a peace deal with him. The Oslo, they tried. You do your research. They tried. They offered him everything, and he walked away from the table and started the Intifada. There's zero chance for peace with the leadership that the Palestinians have. And now, I agree with you, now Israel, after decades and decades and decades of there being peaceful governments and governments that want, we're done with it. And now, yes, you're right, Netanyahu is in power, because that's what happens after decades of being burnt like this. So yeah, it's a harder problem than it's been. I definitely agree. And he's not going to be in power forever. I think he's going to fall out of power, hopefully, as a result of everything that just happened. But I don't think we're going to get a peace government in power. I don't think it's going to happen because we've been burned so many times. Unless we're going to see something different. Like Gaza was the last straw. 2005 was the last straw. This was such a difficult thing to do, such a difficult thing that they literally, the army went in there and literally pulled people from their homes and pulled them onto trucks and
I remember this.
took them away. And this is what we got in response. And the world has no sympathy for us. And the world, still telling us it's our fault.
Well, yeah, my timeline is exploding with the most horrific images of babies, children torn apart.
It's terrible. Yes, it's terrible. And Hamas is to blame. They knew exactly.
There I don't agree.
So,
I agree with everything you say, and then this current response to what happened there, that no, I can't accept this almost indiscriminate bombing and killing 8,000 people in the space of a few weeks.
First of all, I don't know what the numbers are. I have no idea. I honestly don't accept.
I accept these numbers. I think thousands have died.
I think thousands have died. Yes, I agree. Thousands have died. I don't know that I accept 8,000, and I'm not just because I want to be oblivious, but I don't trust that they have to say every opportunity that they have to make us look terrible and make us look bad. This is what they do. So I
agree that's part of the strategy to make you look as evil as possible, but they do have several opportunities to do that.
Well, I understand.
If Israel bombs a refugee camp and claims to kill one Hamas leader and then hundreds are killed and wounded, I mean, is that really the best a modern nation like Israel can do at that point?
If you've got a better solution, we're all ears. But after what happened this time,
it may sound absurd to you, but do you know Jocko Willink?
Yes.
Yeah. I follow him a little bit because I like his ideas about discipline and stuff. He's this big macho and he has combat experience. But even he says that this is, from a military point of view, this doesn't make much sense to bomb them. He was for creating safe havens for women and children, and that would actually hurt Hamas. You take away their human shields.
They won't let them go to safe havens. They are bombing the roads out of the town. They won't let them. And the truth is, William, I have to go. I
understand. Yeah, me too.
I would love to continue with this because this is an important.
Me too. Also, for me,
you're talking about a situation. Again, I agree with you that it's terrible. I agree with you that it's awful, and I don't want to see another baby in Gaza die. I don't.
I mean, neither.
But I don't know what the other choice is. I don't know. If it's true that the Hiroshima bomb ended World War II. So,
but that's also debatable.
I understand. That's what I said. If right, but then there's sometimes that these things happen, and it looks terrible and it's awful. And at the same time, I can understand how a military and a government is just fed up with dealing with this, and we're not going to. Even when we do hold back, even when we do try, everybody tells us that we're murderers anyway. Everyone tells us that we're mass murderers, genocide, no matter what we do. So I think they said, forget it. I don't care anymore. Why should I care what the world is going to think of me when I'm doing what I need to do to protect myself?
I understand the process and this evolution. This I understand, but I can't agree with it.
I hear.
And I'm very, very glad for this opportunity. I really appreciate it that you took your time, that you take this so seriously and really try to explain this to me. I don't want to sit here in my echo chamber and I lose sleep over dead babies in Gaza and I go, I hate Israel. Stop.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense to me. Unfortunately, there's 50 years behind it that brings us to this point. But I hear. We'll continue. God willing, we'll continue.
I'd love to.
Do this
anytime.
Okay, very nice to meet you, my friend.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you,
Moshe. All the best, man. All the best.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.